Emily smoothed down the front of her one good dress, fingertips catching on a tiny thread coming loose at the hem. She'd spent an hour last night steaming out the wrinkles with her old kettle, the same way she'd learned to do when money was too tight for an iron. The dress, navy blue with tiny white dots, had seen her through 3 years of job interviews. She hoped today would be the last time she'd need its luck. Outside the imposing brick factory building, Emily checked her reflection in a darkened window. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her makeup minimal but enough to hide the shadows under her eyes. 3 jobs and still barely making rent had hollowed her cheeks, but she'd practiced her smile until it looked genuine. Today had to work. The Morton manufacturing position paid nearly double what she made at the diner, with actual health benefits. The ad had said no experience necessary. A miracle these days. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, the way she always did before stepping into places that made her feel small. The receptionist, the sleek woman with perfect nails, gave Emily's worn leather purse a dismissive glance. "Mr. Morton is very busy. You'll have 10 minutes, maximum." Emily nodded, throat dry. She'd prepared for this, rehearsed answers to every possible question while serving coffee at the diner, while changing sheets at the hotel, while helping Mrs. Winters into her bath at the nursing home. 3 jobs, and still she counted pennies for bus fare. The elevator carried her to the executive floor, all glass, chrome, and hushed voices. The view of Chicago's skyline made her think of how far she'd come from that small town in Ohio, how far they'd both come. She pushed the thought away. This wasn't about the past. This was about survival. 20 years earlier. "You're going to get us in trouble again," 6-year-old Emily whispered, her small feet soundless on the wooden floor of the orphanage dormitory. 8-year-old James grinned in the darkness, his front tooth still growing in. "Only if they catch us." "Come on, I found something." The Oakwood Children's Home housed 37 children that winter, but somehow James always found ways to make it feel like they were the only 2 people in the world. He led her down the hallway, past the snoring night matron, whose glasses sat folded on her desk, and into the seldom-used music room. "Look," he said, pointing to the window. It was larger than the ones in their dormitory, and through it, the night sky sprawled in endless glory. February in Ohio meant crystalline clarity, stars burning like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Emily pressed her nose to the cold glass. "I've never seen so many. My book says they have names. Whole stories about them." James sat beside her on the piano bench, holers touching. His book on constellations was one of his few possessions, dog-eared from nightly readings. "That bright one?" he whispered, pointing. "That's Sirius, the dog star, the brightest star in the whole sky." "It's beautiful," Emily breathed. "When I get adopted, I'm going to have a telescope. A big one." James said it matter-of-factly, the way children speak of certainties. "I'll look at all the stars, even the ones nobody can see without special lenses." Emily felt the familiar ache forming. "You'll get adopted soon. You're smart. Everyone says so." James turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the moonlight. "You'll get adopted too. We both will. Maybe the same family will take us." They both knew this was unlikely. Families rarely came for siblings, let alone unrelated children. But in the music room, under stars that had witnessed thousands of years of human hopes and disappointments, anything seemed possible. "If not," James said, taking her small hand in his, "we'll find each other when we're grown up. Promise?" "I promise." He reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out 2 paper stars he'd cut from the yellow construction paper. Miss Andrews had given them for art time. On each, he'd carefully written their name. "Look," he said, holding them up to the window. "No matter where we are, we'll be under the same stars. We'll never really be apart." Emily took her star, tucking it carefully into her nightgown pocket. "Never forget me." "Oh, never," James said fiercely. "Not ever." The office doors were imposing, dark wood with James Morton, CEO in austere gold lettering. Emily took a steadying breath and knocked. "Enter." The voice sent a jolt through her before she'd even opened the door. Deep, commanding, but with an undertone she would have recognized anywhere, in any crowd, across any distance. The man behind the desk didn't look up immediately. He was signing documents, fountain pen moving with practiced efficiency across paper. Emily stood, her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing and yet not believing. James? He was different now. Broader shoulders, Angular jawline, the slight boyish softness replaced by a man's definition. His once unruly dark hair was expensively cut, grey threaded at the temples despite him being only 28. When he finally raised his eyes, they were the same impossible blue that had once promised her the stars. But cold. So cold. Miss. He glanced down at the resume his assistant had placed before him. Sullivan, please sit. Emily sank into the chair opposite his desk, her knees suddenly weak. He didn't recognize her, or was pretending not to. She watched his face for any flicker of the boy who had been her only friend, the only person who had ever truly seen her. Nothing, just the impassive mask of a man who had climbed his way to the top and forgotten what the bottom looked like. Your resume shows quite a diverse work history. His tone suggested this wasn't a compliment. I believe in hard work, Mr. Morton. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, and I'm a quick learner. He glanced up, their eyes meeting properly for the first time. For a split second, so brief she almost missed it, something flashed across his face. Recognition, then immediately a shuttering like blinds coming down over a window. The position is entry-level, on the factory floor. Long hours, physically demanding. I'm stronger than I look. This was their routine now, she realized, pretending to be strangers. Perhaps it was easier for him that way? James. Mr. Morton now continued the interview with practiced detachment, asking about her experience, her availability, her transportation situation. He might have been talking to any applicant, any stranger walking in off the street. 20 minutes later, Emily found herself being ushered out with a brisk, "We'll be in touch." No acknowledgement, no hint of their shared past. Nothing in his perfect, controlled demeanor to suggest he remembered nights spent whispering under borrowed blankets, sharing stolen cookies, wiping each other's tears when the world proved too harsh for children with no one else. Back on the street, Emily leaned against the building's cold brick exterior, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. The shock of seeing him, so changed, so distant, left her feeling hollow. She had spent years dreaming of finding him again, imagining a joyful reunion. Instead, she'd gotten this, a man who looked at her with a stranger's eyes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Winter's daughter. They needed Emily to cover an extra shift that night. Tomorrow she was on breakfast duty at the diner at 5 a.m., then the hotel housekeeping from 2 to 8 p.m. She was bone-tired already. As she walked toward the bus stop, Emily slipped her hand into her coat pocket and felt something papery. The star. The yellowed paper star James had made for her all those years ago, which she'd transferred from pocket to pocket of every coat she'd ever owned. Her one talisman of hope. She was about to pull it out when her phone rang. "Miss Sullivan?" A woman's crisp voice. "This is Margaret Fontaine, Mr. Morton's assistant. He's reviewed your application and would like to offer you the position starting Monday. 8 a.m. sharp." Emily closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "Thank you. Please tell Mr. Morton I accept." "Very good. Report to Human Resources on Monday morning." The call ended. Emily looked up at the towering building where somewhere on the top floor, James Morton, the boy who had once promised to find her under any sky, had just given her a job while pretending she was a perfect stranger. What she didn't see was James standing at his office window, watching her small figure on the sidewalk below. She didn't see him press his palm against the cold glass, didn't see him close his eyes, didn't hear him whisper her name for the first time in 20 years. She didn't see him pull from his desk drawer a faded paper star with her name written in a child's careful handwriting. And she certainly didn't see the tear that slid down his face before he roughly wiped it away, straightened his tie, and became Mr. Morton again, the man who had learned that forgetting was easier than remembering, that ice was safer than fire, and that some promises were better left beneath the stars of childhood where they belonged. The factory floor hummed with the rhythmic percussion of machinery, a symphony of metal against metal that Emily had grown accustomed to over the past 3 months. Her station was at the far end, where she inspected components before they moved down the line. The work was repetitive, but required attention to detail, something Emily had always excelled at. Even as a child, she'd noticed things others missed, like how James's jaw clenched every time he visited the factory floor, how his eyes would sweep the space and linger just for a heartbeat too long on her workstation, how he'd look away the moment she glanced up. They had perfected an elaborate dance of avoidance, professional nods in hallways, clipped responses during mandatory meetings. To anyone watching, they were employer and employee, nothing more. The charade was exhausting. Today the fatigue felt bone deep. Emily had been battling waves of nausea all week, pushing through shifts with a stubborn determination that her co-workers had come to admire. But as she reached for the next component, the factory floor tilted beneath her, yellow spots bloomed in her vision, and the familiar roar of machinery suddenly sounded very far away. "Sullivan? You okay?" Lisa from the next station was looking at her with concern. "I'm fine," Emily started to say, but the words dissolved into darkness. 21 years earlier. "We caught James sneaking food again," Mrs. Grayson reported, her thin lips pressed into a disappointed line. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Emily?" 7-year-old Emily stared at her worn shoes, avoiding the orphanage director's piercing gaze. James had been caught taking extra bread from the kitchen, bread Emily knew was meant for her. "No, ma'am," she whispered. "He says he was hungry, but that boy eats plenty at mealtimes." Mrs. Grayson's voice softened slightly. "Emily, if someone is bullying you, taking your food, you need to tell us." Emily shook her head vigorously. "Nobody's taking my food." What she couldn't explain was that she'd been giving her food to Molly, the new girl who cried every night and was too scared to eat in the busy dining hall. James had noticed, and without a word, had started making sure Emily didn't go hungry. "James is in timeout until dinner," Mrs. Grayson said, sighing. "Perhaps that will teach him to respect rules." That night, Emily found James sitting alone by the dormitory window. His face was solemn in the silver moonlight. "You didn't have to lie," he said when she sat beside him. "Neither did you." Emily nudged his shoulder with hers. "But thank you." James shrugged, embarrassed by her gratitude. "That's what friends do. We look out for each other." "Always?" "Always," he promised. "Even when nobody else does." Emily woke to the antiseptic smell of the employee health clinic, a fluorescent light buzzing overhead. The company nurse was checking her blood pressure, her face professionally neutral. "Welcome back," she said, removing the cuff. "How are you feeling?" "Embarrassed," Emily admitted, pushing herself up. "I don't know what happened. Low blood sugar, possibly." "When did you last eat?" Emily tried to remember. She'd skipped breakfast, rushing to make her shift on time. Yesterday's dinner had been a granola bar, eaten between bus transfers. "I'm fine, really. I need to get back to work." She started to swing her legs off the examination table when the door opened. James stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His presence filled the small room instantly, that inexplicable gravity he'd always possessed, even as a child. "Miss Sullivan," his voice was carefully modulated. "Nurse Reynolds, may I have a moment with our employee?" The nurse nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind her. For several seconds James said nothing. He stood with his back to the door, hands in his pockets, looking at a point somewhere above Emily's head. "This is the second time you've fainted this month," he finally said. Emily blinked in surprise. "You've been keeping track?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Floor supervisors report all incidents." "Of course." Emily looked down at her hands. "It won't happen again. Have you seen a doctor?" The question caught her off guard, not just the words but the faint undercurrent of concern beneath his professional tone. "I don't have health insurance." She immediately regretted the admission. "The company insurance doesn't kick in until 6 months. James's eyes finally met hers, and for a split second, she saw a crack in his perfect facade. "You need to take care of yourself, Miss Sullivan." "I'm handling it." The words came out sharper than intended. "Are you?" His gaze was penetrating now, reminding her of the boy who had always seen through her brave faces. "Because from where I stand, you look exhausted. You're working yourself into the ground." Emily felt a flare of indignation. "With all due respect, Mr. Morton, my well-being is not your concern. It is when it affects workplace safety." His voice had chilled again, the momentary glimpse of the old James vanishing behind the CEO mask. "I'm sending you home for the day. With pay." Before she could protest, he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of his expensive cologne and the lingering sensation that something had shifted between them. A hairline fracture in the wall they'd both constructed. The clinic referred Emily to a community health center, where the news came in 2 devastating waves. The first, she was pregnant. 8 weeks from the brief relationship with Mark, the charismatic sales rep who'd promised to call and never did, who had blocked her number when she'd finally worked up the courage to text him about her suspicions. The second wave came 2 weeks later, after blood tests ordered by a concerned doctor who didn't like the persistent fatigue, the unexplained bruising on her arms and legs. Leukemia. Not just any kind, but acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive, requiring immediate treatment. The pregnancy complicates things, Dr. Watkins explained gently. The treatments we'd normally recommend aren't safe for the fetus. And delaying treatment, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Emily sat in the sterile examination room, her hands protectively covering her still flat stomach. Inside her grew a miracle, a child who would be hers alone, someone who would belong to her in a way no one ever had before. "I need to think," she whispered. James watched Emily through the glass wall of his office. Even from a distance, he could see the change in her. Something was wrong, more than fatigue, more than the financial struggles he'd deduced from her employment history. There was a new fragility to her movements, a caution that hadn't been there before. "Margaret, get me the employee file for Emily Sullivan," he said into his intercom. Minutes later, he was staring at the sparse details of her life. Previous employments, the address of her small apartment in a neighborhood that made him frown, emergency contact, left blank. No family, no one to call if something happened to her. Just like the little girl he'd known, with no one in the world but him. He shouldn't get involved. He'd made that decision 20 years ago when the Mortons had adopted him, wealthy, childless, and determined to shape him into their image of success. They'd made it clear his past was to be forgotten, his future to be dedicated to the family business. No distractions, no looking back. And he'd succeeded beyond their expectations, turning Morton Manufacturing from a regional business into a national powerhouse. He'd become the son they'd wanted, driven, ambitious, ruthless when necessary. But at night, alone in his penthouse overlooking the city, the old dream still came. Emily's small hand in his, her complete trust that he would keep his promise, that he would find her again. He had found her, or rather she had found him. Walking into his office that day like a ghost from a past he'd tried so hard to bury. He'd almost said her name, almost reached for her. But 20 years of discipline had held him back. What could he offer her now? He wasn't the boy who had promised her the stars anymore. That boy had died a little each year in boarding schools and corporate boardrooms. James closed the file, a decision forming. He would help from a distance, set up an anonymous fund for her medical care, make sure she kept her job, regardless of absences. It was the sensible approach, the one that wouldn't complicate either of their lives. But when Emily collapsed again the following week, this time on the factory floor, pale as death, James found himself kneeling beside her, his carefully constructed walls crumbling as he called her name. Not Ms. Sullivan, Emily. The hospital waiting room was a purgatory of beige walls and outdated magazines. James had been there for 3 hours, alternating between pacing and staring blankly at his phone. His assistant had rescheduled meetings, his driver had been dismissed, and still he waited for what? He wasn't entirely sure. "Mr. Morton?" He looked up to find a nurse watching him curiously. "Miss Sullivan is asking for you." Emily was sitting up in the hospital bed, looking small against the white sheets. An IV line snaked from her arm, and monitors beeped quietly beside her. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice stronger than he'd expected. "As I mentioned before, employee welfare is a company concern." The words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Emily studied him, a hint of the old directness in her gaze. "You haven't changed as much as you want people to think." James glanced away, uncomfortable with her perception. "The doctors say you're severely anemic, among other things." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I'm pregnant." The news hit him with unexpected force. Congratulations, and I have leukemia." The second statement hung in the air between them, devastating in its simplicity. James felt the world tilt beneath him. "Treatment?" he managed to ask, complicated by the pregnancy. Emily's hands moved protectively to her stomach. "They want me to consider termination so they can start aggressive chemotherapy. And if you don't, I might not survive to term. Or I might. It's a gamble." Her voice was remarkably steady. "But this baby is everything I've never had. A family, Someone who belongs to me. James sank into the chair beside her bed, the carefully maintained distance between them suddenly irrelevant in the face of her mortality. Emily. Her name felt both foreign and familiar on his tongue. Let me help you. She looked at him, confusion evident. Why now? You've pretended not to know me for months. I thought it would be easier. The admission cost him. For both of us. Easier than what? James had no answer that wouldn't expose too much of himself, too much of the boy he'd locked away but never quite forgotten. An awkward silence stretched between them until Emily reached for her purse on the bedside table. They found this when they were checking my pockets in the ER. She pulled out a faded yellow paper star, its edges soft from years of handling. James stared at it, his throat suddenly tight. You kept it. His voice was barely audible. I never forgot, Emily said simply. Even when I thought you had. James reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew his wallet. From an inner compartment, he produced a matching yellow star, equally worn. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You kept yours too. I tried to forget. His voice was rough with emotion. I told myself it was childish sentimentality, that we were just two lonely kids clinging to each other because we had no one else. Weren't we? No. James looked at the star in his palm. You were the only person who ever saw me. Not what I could be, or what someone wanted me to be. Just me. The monitors beeped steadily in the background as 20 years of silence crumbled between them. James reached for her hand, her fingers cold against his palm. I'm scared, Emily admitted, her voice small. I know. James tightened his grip. But you're not alone anymore. Whatever you decide about the baby, about treatment, I'm here. Emily looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the expensive suit and carefully controlled expression to the boy who had once promised her the stars. Why now? She asked again. James met her gaze steadily. Because some promises can't be broken, no matter how hard we try. Outside the hospital window, the first stars of evening were appearing in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their childhood vow, now bearing witness to its renewal. As Emily's hand tightened around his, James felt something long dormant awakening within him, the certainty that this time he wouldn't let go. The penthouse apartment occupied the entire top floor of Chicago's prestigious Lakeshore Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city and lake beyond. It was here, in this minimalist temple to success, that James brought Emily after her discharge from the hospital. This is too much, Emily protested weakly as the private elevator opened directly into the foyer. I can manage at my apartment. Your apartment is a fifth-floor walk-up with unreliable heat, James replied, his tone brooking no argument. And you heard Dr. Levine. You need rest, proper nutrition, and minimal stress. I don't want charity. James set her small suitcase down, turning to face her. This isn't charity, Emily. This is, he paused, searching for words that wouldn't frighten her away. This is me keeping a promise. The guest suite he'd prepared was larger than Emily's entire apartment, with a king-size bed and an adjoining sitting area. A nurse would come daily to administer her medications and monitor her condition, and a chef had been hired to prepare meals that would help maintain her strength while accommodating her nausea. All of it arranged within 48 hours of her diagnosis. You can't just put your life on hold for me, Emily said that evening as they sat in the living room, the lights of Chicago twinkling below like earthbound stars. I'm not. James handed her a cup of ginger tea. I'm still working. The company is still running. But this, she gestured to the space around them, the implicit care in every arrangement. This is too much. Would you believe me if I said I'm being selfish? James settled into the chair opposite her. That having you here gives me peace of mind. Emily studied him over the rim of her cup. Maybe. But there's more to it than that. James looked away, out toward the distant horizon where Lake Michigan met the night sky. When the Mortons adopted me, they had expectations. They wanted an heir to the family business, someone to continue their legacy. Not a child to love. Emily listened quietly, recognizing the cost of this confession. They sent me to boarding school 2 weeks after the adoption was finalized. Summers were filled with enrichment programs, business camps, internships with family friends. I was being molded. His voice hardened. I learned quickly what was required of me: excellence, detachment, focus. And you excelled, Emily observed. I did. By the time I graduated from Harvard Business School, I was everything they wanted. James's smile was brittle. On the outside and on the inside? He met her gaze. Empty, going through motions, building an empire that meant nothing because there was no one to share it with. You could have found someone. Emily's voice was gentle. You're successful, handsome. I tried, James admitted. Dating, relationships, all the expected steps. But no one, he hesitated, no one ever knew the real me, because I'd forgotten who that was. Until you walked into my office, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be seen. The oncology wing of Chicago Memorial Hospital became their shared battlefield over the following weeks. Emily had chosen a middle path, moderate treatments that wouldn't harm the baby but might slow the progression of her disease until delivery became viable. It was a gamble, the doctors warned. One that might cost her the precious time she needed to fight effectively. I know what I'm doing, she told James after one particularly grim consultation. This baby is my miracle, my family. James, who had long since abandoned any pretense of professional distance, had taken to attending every appointment, absorbing medical information with the same intensity he brought to corporate acquisitions. There are experimental treatments, he told her one evening as they reviewed the latest test results in the penthouse living room. A trial in Boston that's showing promise for cases like yours. I've spoken with the lead researcher. Emily shook her head, one hand resting on her growing belly. At 16 weeks, the curve was pronounced on her thin frame. No trials, James. Nothing that might hurt the baby. But after delivery, let's focus on getting that far first, she said softly. James wanted to argue, to push back against what felt increasingly like a choice that would take her from him just when he'd found her again. But looking at Emily's face, serene despite the circles under her eyes, determined despite the odds, he recognized the same quiet strength that had sustained her through a childhood of loss and disappointment. Whatever you need, he promised instead. I'm here. 23 years earlier. They're coming to meet you tomorrow, Mrs. Grayson told 8-year-old James, her Hurie's stern face softened with rare approval. The Mortons, they specifically asked about you after the school tour. James felt the familiar mix of hope and terror that every orphan knows, the possibility of being chosen, of belonging, tangled with the fear of the unknown. Can Emily come too? He asked, his small voice uncertain. Mrs. Grayson's smile faded. The Mortons are only looking to adopt one child, James, a boy, to carry on the family name. But we're friends, we promised. James. Mrs. Grayson knelt to his level, her face serious. This is a wonderful opportunity for you. The Mortons are very wealthy, very connected. They can give you advantages most of our children could only dream of. I don't care about that, James insisted, panic rising. Emily needs me. Emily will be fine. She's a sweet girl. Someone will adopt her soon, I'm sure. But 6-year-old Emily, listening from the hallway, knew better. No one wanted the quiet girl with the sickly constitution. The girl who woke crying from nightmares, who flinched at raised voices, remnants of the abuse she'd escaped before coming to Oakwood. No one except James, who saw past all of that to the person underneath. That night, as they sat at their window watching stars appear in the velvet sky, James made his most solemn vow yet. I'll find you, he whispered fiercely. No matter where they take me, no matter how long it takes, I'll come back for you. Emily, wise beyond her years, squeezed his hand. You can't promise that. You have to go with them, James. You have to have a life. Not without you, he insisted, the stubborn set of his jaw making him look older than his 8 years. The next day, the Mortons arrived in a sleek black car, wearing expensive clothes and practiced smiles. They spoke to James about opportunities and expectations, about the legacy he would inherit. They didn't once ask about his friends, his dreams, or the paper star he clutched in his pocket throughout the meeting. 2 days later he was gone, whisked away to his new life, so quickly that Emily found his bed already stripped when she returned from breakfast. No goodbye, no last hug, just emptiness where her only friend had been. That night, alone at the window, Emily held her paper star up to the sky and made her own promise. I'll be okay, I'll be brave, for both of us. I've been thinking about names, Emily said, her voice pulling James from the financial reports he was reviewing. It was late, the penthouse quiet except for the soft jazz playing in the background. Duke Ellington, Emily's favorite. He set the papers aside, giving her his full attention. Any frontrunners? For a girl, I was thinking Stella. Her smile was tentative. It means star. The significance wasn't lost on him. It's beautiful. And for a boy, maybe James. Her eyes held his, gauging his reaction. If that's okay. James felt something catch in his chest. You don't have to do that. I want to. Emily's hand covered her rounded belly. At 24 weeks, the baby was occasionally active, kicking and turning as if impatient to join the world. You're the best man I've ever known, James. Both as that fierce little boy who protected me and as the man sitting here now. He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, hesitantly placing his hand next to hers. The baby kicked against his palm, and James felt an unexpected surge of emotion. Hello there, little one, he whispered. She likes your voice, Emily said. She always kicks when you talk. She? Just a feeling. They sat in companionable silence, hands side by side on the swell of new life between them. Outside, a spring storm rolled in off the lake, occasional lightning illuminating the darkened sky. Emily, James began, uncertain how to articulate what had been building in him for weeks. I want you to know that whatever happens, this baby will never be alone. I'll make sure of it. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I know you will, but I'm not giving up on you either, he continued, his voice firming. We're going to fight this, together, just like we used to face down the bullies at Oakwood. She gave him a watery smile. You were always so sure we could win any battle. And I was right, wasn't I? Emily reached up to touch his face, her fingers cool against his skin. Yes, you were, my brave James, against the world. The moment stretched between them, filled with 2 decades of missed opportunities and unspoken feelings. Then, with a gentleness that belied the strength in his hands, James pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they parted, Emily's eyes were bright with emotion. I've loved you for so long, she confessed, even when I thought I'd never see you again. I think I've loved you my whole life, James replied, the words both foreign and utterly natural on his tongue. I just didn't know how to recognize it until you came back. Outside, the storm moved on, clouds parting to reveal a sky full of stars, the same stars that had witnessed their childhood promises, now bearing witness to this new beginning. Stella Catherine Morton was born at 29 weeks, tiny, fierce, and fighting for every breath. The labor had been difficult, Emily's weakened body struggling to bring her daughter safely into the world, but as the first cry pierced the delivery room, a smile of pure wonder transformed Emily's exhausted face. She's perfect, she whispered, as the nurses placed the tiny bundle briefly on her chest before whisking the baby to the NICU. James, who hadn't left her side throughout the 17-hour ordeal, pressed his lips to her forehead. Just like her mother. The following weeks became a blur of hospital corridors, the NICU where tiny Stella grew stronger each day, and the oncology ward where Emily began the aggressive treatment her body had desperately needed for months. It's working, Dr. Levine told them 6 weeks after Stella's birth. The cancer cells are responding to treatment better than we expected. The hope that blossomed with this news was cautious, but real. James allowed himself to imagine a future, the 3 of them together, a family pieced together by fate and choice and love. Emily regained some color in her cheeks. Her hair, which had begun to thin from the early treatments, fell out completely, but she wore colorful scarves with a grace that took James's breath away. Every day he brought Stella from the NICU to visit, watching as Emily catalogued each tiny change in their daughter's development. She has your eyes, Emily observed one afternoon as Stella blinked up at them from the bundle of blankets James cradled. That same blue, and your determination, James replied, watching the infant's tiny fist grasp Emily's finger. Look at that grip. For 8 precious weeks, they existed in this space of cautious optimism, planning for a future that seemed increasingly possible. James had papers drawn up, guardianship documents for Stella, but also others, a marriage license application, property transfers, a future secure. But on a crisp autumn morning, as golden light spilled through the hospital windows, Emily's body finally betrayed the strength of her spirit. The cancer, held temporarily at bay, surged back with devastating force. I need more time, James argued with Dr. Levine in the hallway outside Emily's room. There are other treatments, clinical trials. We've tried everything available, the doctor said gently. I'm sorry, James. It's time to focus on comfort now. Inside the room, Emily lay propped against pillows, her once vibrant presence diminished but not extinguished. On her lap was a sketchbook where she'd been drawing stars and moons and planets, a galaxy of wonders for the daughter who would soon lose her. "Don't be angry," she said when James returned, his face a mask of barely controlled grief. "We always knew this might happen." "I'm not ready," he admitted, taking her hand. Stella slept peacefully in the bassinet beside the bed, finally released from the NICU 3 days earlier. "Neither am I." Emily's smile was fragile but genuine. "But I got my miracle, James. I got to meet our daughter. I got to find you again. Some people live their whole lives without experiencing what we've had these past months." James pressed her hand to his lips, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. "I need you to do something for me," Emily continued. "In my apartment, in the dresser drawer, there's a box. I need you to get it." The small apartment felt like a museum of a life, interrupted dishes still in the drying rack, a novel bookmarked on the coffee table, a cardigan draped over a chair as if Emily had just stepped out for a moment and would soon return. James found the box where she'd said it would be, an old cigar box covered in faded stickers. Inside was a collection of treasures, a smooth stone, a pressed flower, a ribbon from what might have been a childhood dress, and at the bottom, protected by tissue paper, a drawing on yellowed construction paper. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a sky full of stars, with childish handwriting beneath "Emily and James forever." He traced the simple lines with his finger, remembering the night he'd drawn it, one of their last together at the orphanage, both of them pretending the next day's adoption meeting wouldn't change everything. When James returned to the hospital, Emily was sleeping, her breathing shallow but peaceful. He sat beside her, the box on his lap, and waited. Outside the window, dusk was falling, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "You found it." Emily's voice was barely audible when she finally opened her eyes. "I did." James helped her sit up slightly, placing the box where she could reach it. With trembling fingers, Emily removed the drawing, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at it. "I kept everything, every memory of you." "I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner," James whispered, the regret that had haunted him for months finally spilling over. "All those years we lost." "No," Emily's voice was suddenly stronger, her gaze direct. "No regrets, James. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. And now you'll have Stella." As if on cue, the baby stirred in her bassinet, making the small mewling sounds that preceded waking. James lifted her carefully, placing her in Emily's arms. "My sweet girl," Emily murmured, pressing her lips to Stella's downy head. "You are so loved." James sat on the edge of the bed, his arms supporting both of them as Emily whispered to their daughter words of love, of hope, of dreams for a future she wouldn't see. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were clear despite the tears. "Promise me you'll tell her about me," she said. "About the orphanage, about the stars, everything." "I promise," James vowed, his voice breaking. "And promise you'll be happy." Emily reached up to touch his face. "That you'll live the life we should have had together." This promise was harder, but he made it anyway, knowing it was what she needed to hear. As night deepened outside the window, Emily's strength began to fade. James climbed onto the bed beside her, Stella nestled between them, and told stories of their childhood, the midnight adventures, the stolen cookies, the dreams they'd shared under orphanage windows. Emily smiled, her eyes drifting to the stars visible beyond the glass. "Do you remember what you told me about Sirius? The brightest star? That you could always find it, no matter where you were," James recalled. "That it would guide you home." "Yes." Her voice was fading now, each word an effort. "Look for me there." In the pre-dawn hours, as Stella slept peacefully between them and the brightest stars still dotted the sky, Emily slipped away, not in pain or fear, but with a gentle sigh, her hand still clasped in James's. Her last words had been simple. "You came back to me, just like you promised." 5 years later. "Daddy, hurry. The stars are coming out." Stella's excited voice carried across the rooftop garden of the penthouse, where James had created a sanctuary of flowers and comfortable seating centered around a professional-grade telescope. At 5, Stella was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, with Emily's chestnut hair and James's piercing blue eyes. "I'm coming, sweetheart." James set aside the book he'd been reading, one of many children's books about stars and space that filled Stella's shelves. The evening was clear, perfect for stargazing. As he helped Stella adjust the telescope, James felt the familiar blend of joy and sorrow that accompanied these moments, the visceral happiness of sharing this with his daughter, tangled with the wish that Emily could be there to see it. "Can we find Mommy's star first?" Stella asked, as she did every time. "Of course." James guided the telescope towards Sirius, a ritual they'd established from Stella's earliest days. "There it is, the brightest one in the sky." Stella pressed her eye to the viewfinder, her small body vibrating with excitement. "I see it. It's so bright tonight." "It is," James agreed, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Tell me the story again," Stella requested, settling onto his lap as they moved to the cushioned bench nearby. "About you and Mommy and the paper stars." James smiled, drawing her close as the night air cooled around them. This was their ritual too. The stories passed down like precious heirlooms, keeping Emily alive in her daughter's heart. "Once upon a time, there was a little boy and a little girl who lived in a place where no one wanted them." He began, the words familiar as breathing. "But they had each other, and every night they would look up at the stars and make promises." As he spoke, James gazed up at the vast expanse above them. The same stars that had witnessed his childhood vow, his reunion with Emily, and now watched over him and their daughter. In the brightest one, he sometimes imagined he could see Emily's smile, her hand reaching out across the cosmos to touch them both. Some promises, he had learned, transcended time and distance, written not in paper stars but in the very fabric of the universe, eternal, unbreakable, guiding the way home.